for selecting a resolution. So the first step in self-facilitating the Junior Model UN final conference is selecting a resolution that your students will be debating and amending during the final conference program. So this is really the fundamental aspect of, what students will be working on at the final conference and what their end goal is as they're, like I said, debating and amending the clauses. And so the overall purpose or the overall goal of this conference is to give students the platform to debate these critical global issues, and they're using the resolution as that key policy document that they're debating and discussing and that they will ultimately vote on. And this draft resolution that's chosen ahead of the final conference will be made up of the preambulatory and corresponding operative clauses that you choose from your students' resolutions. And typically our resolutions that we choose for our Junior Model UN final conference have 3 pairs of those corresponding preambulatory and operative clauses. We think 3 is a good number usually for these resolutions.
Can you back up? What do you mean by 3 pairs of?
Yes, so for the preambulatory clauses, those are the clauses that are in the beginning of a resolution.
Right.
Right, and then the operative clauses, the corresponding operative clauses that propose the solutions and actions that directly relate to those preambulatory.
Right.
Of course, the students can only amend the operative clauses during the final conference, but we ought to come up with a full resolution. Publish those preambulatory clauses as well for the resolution ahead of time. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, I'm in the meeting. I'm sorry, somebody just walked in. I guess I'm trying to figure out, so I have
pull up an example here.
Okay, great.
But go ahead.
No, so I have 12 students, and they're divided into 4 groups, and there are 3 students in each group, so they, 4 different countries. And so does that mean I'm selecting one from each country, or am I doing just one and all the countries are working on that one? I guess I don't know how that goes.
So that's a good question. And sorry if I was a little confusing about that. So we select clauses from different resolutions and stitch them together to make the resolution that will be debated at the final conference.
Okay, regardless of country affiliation.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. We'll have clauses that, because we'll have different, you just have your school, but we have different schools participating in the final conference. We'll have clauses from all different schools that are stitched together into that final three operative clause solution. So I'll pull up an example here.
Okay, great.
A little easier. So you can see here the sponsors are the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Republic of Serbia, and the United Mexican States. So that goes in order of the clauses that are here. So this first preambulatory and first operative are from Republic of the Congo, second from Serbia, and the third from Mexico.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, that's really helpful. That's
so in the case of your students, if you only have 4 countries, it might be more in your interest to do 4-clause resolution if you have the time, right? So you're not just, so that way maybe if you want to include every group, at least 1 clause gets chosen from each of those groups. So I think that's up to you to decide,
Okay.
Only 4. So that's oh, I'm so sorry, I stopped sharing. That's just a suggestion. I don't know, what do you think, Eric? But
no, that's right. If you have only 4 countries, you might want to take 1 clause from every country, just so that you don't have one country, students left out. And that way you can kind of increase participation, spread that across all of your groups. Yeah, I think that was a good suggestion, Casey.
Okay, this is really helpful. Now I'm able to kind of to see this. So I really appreciate that example that you just shared. Will you be attaching that to something or have you already attached it for us?
Yep, so it's here, it's linked here. There's actually another example too. They're both linked here in this selecting a resolution document.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, you can access both of those examples in this document. So I think we already went over this, but we try to select 3 clauses, well, 3 sets of clauses really,
Right.
from that identify the different key issues that would be interesting for students to debate. So we like to pick a variety of topics as well, or I guess subtopics within the topic, right? So we try to not only, to look at like the variety and the solutions that they're proposing, but also maybe the variety and like the sources that they're using or the information they're providing in their preambulatory clauses as well. So we try to get a good range of ideas in that stitched together resolution. So that way there's more of a variety for students to talk about and to debate.
Perfect. Got it.
So I think I covered everything in this here for the selection. So the students that are chosen will have to defend their clauses. So they should know ahead of time that their clause has been chosen, so they have enough time to prepare for clarifying questions from their peers, which we'll go over more, I think.
Okay.
And also going into the idea of picking a good resolution and good clauses over great clauses. I can get into that a little bit right now. So the main activity of the final conference is for students to come up with amendments for these operative clauses that were ahead of time. We find that it gives more space for students to incorporate their ideas and to debate. If we pick operative clauses that could use a little work, maybe they're not specific enough. Maybe they're too focused on just one country and not, a broader range of UN member countries. Maybe they're missing some key like figures or goals and targets, or maybe they need to name a particular UN agency to make them stronger. So that's why, the best clause isn't always the clause to choose for your final conference resolution, because it doesn't give as much space for the students to amend.
Got it. And Eric, you were kind enough to share that award-winning position paper. Will you be able to do the same for for the resolution as well, just so that we have a really strong mentor text to look at? That would be so helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. So I can send that along. We've attached 2 in this document. They're hyperlinked, in case if you scroll up just a little bit. But
Okay, perfect.
I can send you a selection of other strong resolutions from years past. We get, with a couple hundred students in the program, we get to review a couple hundred of them a year, but we can select a nice, cross sampling of good, but not, the strongest resolution.
Right. Right.
That we like to select for our final conference.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And
I'm in a meeting, Teacher Pam. I'm sorry. I just have you need something? It would be on the cart. I'm sorry. I just had an absent student.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Sorry. I'm back. I'm sorry.
And I'll just say one quick note about awards. Also, we'll talk about awards later. Now, you'll have students who have just submitted really strong resolutions, right? But they weren't selected for the resolution that will ultimately be amended during the final conference. Because you're running this as a self-facilitated conference, feel free to award those students for their hard work, independently of this. If you want to create an award for the strongest resolution, you can do that yourself, absolutely. So those students, who did submit really strong work, get recognized because they deserve that recognition, even though we're selecting students' resolutions that are really in that kind of mid-range, resolutions that aren't perfect, but offer some opportunity to be improved through the amendment process.
So those that are the good,
exactly.
but like good enough to work from, you think they're worthy, they should be recognized then?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Kristen, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm just kind of silently observing here, but one thing I'll add to Joyce and to those who are watching our recording, being chosen for the final resolution is an honor, right? It means that they've done such great work that we want to actually use that clause for debate. So one thing I will say too to everyone who's self-facilitating is to make sure your students know that. I think They get a little worried that they have to do that public speaking bit when they're in the final resolution, because, right, if their draft is in the final, if their draft clause is in the resolution, they have to actually be prepared to defend it. And some students get a little scared about that aspect of it. But I would just encourage them to realize that if their clause is chosen, if their country's clause is chosen, it's an honor. And you have to also tell them and share that final resolution with them so that they can be prepared to defend their clause, right? They would have committed to you several clauses, but that specific clause is the one that they should be prepared to defend and debate when you all have your final conference date.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, so I think to stay on schedule, Casey, do you mind if we move over towards the agenda? Do you have any final thoughts on selecting a resolution?
Just that there's a note at the end of the document, and I'll just echo that if you have any issues or you want some input or you need help choosing your clauses for your final resolution, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm just wowed by all of the preparation you have all put into this, and really grateful.
Oh, well, we appreciate that very much. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to quickly screen share the next part of our agenda here, which is the actual agenda, our suggested agenda for your final conference. So can you guys see this all right on my screen? Maybe I'll blow this up just a little bit more for you guys.
Yeah, I was going to say just zoom in a little bit. I think that'd be great.
So this is our suggested agenda for the final conference. This is what we'll be using for our final conference. All of this is presented to you to be edited and changed for your specific school's situation. How much time you have with your students, when you have the ability to do the final conference with them, and your staffing levels as well. It takes effort from likely multiple staff members in order to pull this off. It can be done by a single co-chair or a single chair, and we'll get to them in a second. But it's important to kind of just get a scope and a sense of what you're trying to accomplish and how that's going to fit into the timing that you've allotted for your final conference. So again, all of this is flexible, and I'll let you know what are kind of the more flexible and less flexible pieces of this as well. So we start our conference with an opening plenary session. It involves welcome remarks, a keynote address, and other addresses from what we place as a secretary general. Usually it's an experienced Model UN student, maybe a high school student or a collegiate student that can speak about Model UN and what they're doing. It's really like a stage setter for the students, allowing students to kind of get a sense of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then we add about 10 minutes here at the end for logistics. All of this is very flexible. You don't need to have welcome remarks. You don't need to have a keynote address. You don't even need to have a secretary general if you don't need to. This is all stuff that we do, which adds a little bit of like pomp and ceremony to the program, and not necessarily, really a core program component, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So the real program begins at about 9:30. Our program will begin at 9:30. Again, all of these times are flexible to your schedules. So we begin with committee co-chair welcome remarks here. So really quickly, the co-chairs are essentially the MCs of the program. They're the one who work with the students through the program, debate speakers lists, having students, raise their hand to ask clarifying questions or defend their resolution. These are really the people that are I would say behind the scenes, but they're actually forward facing at the front of the room, at the podium, or on Zoom in this case, really directing the content and the direction of the day. So it's a really important position, and likely many of you who are self-facilitating will be taking this role on yourself. You may be training other people to be co-chairs. But this is a really important position, and it really is, again, kind of the MC of the day, the person that shepherds the entire program forward from committee to committee. So that is from nine, we give about 10 minutes for those co-chairs to just do some brief opening remarks. And then we go through setting the committee agenda before a break. We'll get to setting the committee agenda in a second. All of this from 9:30 to 1 p.m. I'm going to go into detail again in a couple of seconds. I just want to present the overall idea here. We spend about an hour and 10 minutes from 10 to 10:10, about an hour and 10 minutes working exclusively on one clause. Okay, so we have our students pick which clause that they want to study first. That's the setting the committee agenda. And again, I'll come back to all of this in a second. But we ask our students to introduce clause 1 and take clarifying questions. So that's when the students who wrote that clause will read it out to the group, and other students ask them clarifying questions. From there, we'll go into an a moderated caucus, which is led by the co-chair. The co-chair selects which students speak, for how long they speak. Again, we'll go into all of this detail in a second. There's an unmoderated caucus. We're going to use breakout rooms for this feature, for this part of the program. This is essentially like small group work where you split your group of 16, 20 students, whatever it is, into groups of 4 or 5 so that they can do really intensive small group work for about 25 minutes or so here. That's where they'll be writing the amendments for this for clause 1.
Eric, can I ask, so those groups would be mixed country groups then?
You can do it a couple of different ways. You can have, we generally keep all the students from the same country together. So it'll be, all the students representing Brazil would be seated at the same table, working with all the students from Nigeria and all the students from Japan per se, in like a little working group like that. You can really do it however you'd like. We would suggest that you keep all your students from the same country together. So.
Okay, but when you do that, they're bringing together people that they haven't worked with before. But if I'm doing that, then they're just staying with the same group of students that they've worked with the entire year. Essentially.
So again, this is where the school specifics will change kind of the impact of some of this. During this unmoderated caucus, this is when they would have, in our program, they would have small group work with students from other schools, essentially. And that's a really important part of this program, is that interpersonal dialogue with students from other schools.
Got it.
For 15 minutes after the unmoderated caucus, we present our amendments, and then we end up voting on those amendments for clause 1. Essentially, that exact template is repeated for clause number 2. You do the exact same thing for clause 2 that you just did for clause 1. Again, another hour and 10 minutes in our program. All of this is again flexible and fungible to your school's needs. In our program, just because of time constraints, we don't amend clause 3. You are more than welcome to go through clause 3 as well, just like clause 1 and clause 2. Because of time constraints, all we have the ability to do is present clause 3, ask some clarifying questions, and then ultimately vote on it before looking at the entire resolution as a whole. So these final 2 pieces here are looking at the entire resolution post amendments, and then students get to eventually vote on whether they vote to pass or fail a final resolution with the incorporated amendments.
Got it.
Again, I'll go through all of these. At the end, we have a closing plenary session. Again, mostly pomp, circumstances, speeches, awards ceremony, and some final closing remarks, mostly just thank yous on behalf of our organization. Again, you can flex that as much as you need to with your independent schools. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this section here, especially this 1 hour presenting and amending clauses, because that's really the bulk of the student work for this program. So I'm going to switch over to this guide, which is our script, our faculty advisor guideline and script for co-chairs. There are a couple of important notes that you guys can read on your own at the top. That's just basically our best practices in how to lead a virtual final conference. Again, some of you will be doing this in person, so some of the virtual components of this will not be as necessary. We generally like to have 2 co-chairs lead the program. That's not possible for every school, but we do break the 2 co-chairs into a lead and support role. This is incredibly important with a virtual final conference. If you're in person, you might not need those 2 roles as much. However, we still suggest that you have 2 co-chairs because there is a balance between directly engaging with students and doing technology at the same time. Projecting resolutions and counting votes and all these things that really it's helpful to have 2 co-chairs in the room for. This document will go through kind of all of those bits and pieces about best practices for voting, awards, best ways to kind of remind your students of some of the core functions of a Model UN program like parliamentary procedure and so on. Really, the bulk of the program, though, again, is fitted into that 9:30 to 1:30 or so time frame. Again, that's like an internal time frame on our part, but for lack of a better term, we'll just kind of go with that for now. So it begins with some committee co-chair welcome remarks. Self-facilitated conferences, you can either do this very informally or do it as formally as you'd like, essentially. We do it a little bit more formally just because of the structure of our program. After those opening remarks comes the setting the committee agenda. So you'll have a resolution with 3 clauses on it. I'm just going to quickly pull up an example resolution here. It's got 3 clauses on it here. However, we want our students to debate the ones that are most interesting to them. So we essentially ask for a vote on them to reorder the clauses depending on which one they want to debate first. So we go through each clause and have students vote on whether they would like to debate clause 1 first, clause 2 first, or clause 3 first. Essentially giving them the opportunity to figure out exactly what clause they think is the most interesting and that they want to debate first. So this setting the committee agenda piece here is all about having your students select which of the 3 clauses that they'll debate. And again, in our program, we only have time to debate 2 of the 3 clauses. So selecting which is the one that they want to debate most and second most is important because that 3rd clause ultimately won't be as debated as thoroughly as the first 2. At your school, you might have time to debate all 3 clauses in full, so the order might not matter quite as much, but we still like to give students the option of ordering it to their own preference. Within the co-chair script is suggested text. You guys are more than welcome to read the suggested text as written. Again, it's written for the virtual format, but you are more than welcome to kind of parse through that and see how it would transition to a in-person program or virtual program for your students. I'm going to just keep moving. We have a PowerPoint slide that I will go through as well that corresponds to this script, and I'll go through that next. We'll just go through one at a time rather than flipping back and forth. So after students have decided which clauses that they would like to debate first, second, or third, the first thing to do is introduce the clause and take clarifying questions. So the student writers of that first operative clause will stand up at the podium or get onto the mic on Zoom and introduce their clause, essentially read it. The co-chairs then ask student delegates for questions, and the readers, the authors of that first clause, have to respond to clarifying questions from their peers. So peers might ask, why did you write it that way? Can you tell me a little bit more about UNICEF? I don't know what UNICEF means. Then it's up to those authors of the clause to define those terms, answer clarifying questions before we get into real substantive debate. Again, it's all about clarifying questions at this point. It's not about whether other students agree or disagree with the clause. It's just about clarifying the point that the authors were trying to make. Following the clarifying questions piece of this, the co-chair will move into a moderated caucus. Again, there's more text here that you can read on your own. We suggest a 15-minute moderated caucus with a 45-second speaking time. So we have a slide, and again, I will transition over to this slideshow in a little bit, but we suggest that the co-chair ask for every student who's willing to make a statement opposing or supporting the clause as written. So we use a speakers list to kind of order our students and who will speak and when they will speak and in what order they will speak. So that speakers list might fill out with, Ethiopia speaks first, Afghanistan speaks second, Brazil speaks third, so on and so forth. And that way the co-chair can kind of run through that speakers list in a pretty formal manner, calling on student delegates in the order in which they've been added to the speakers list. So again, the moderated caucus is a pretty formal structure, but it's really about having students express their acceptance or rejection of the of the clause as written, and offering some thoughts on potentially how it could be made better or what they would do to improve that clause as written. There's no amendment writing during the moderated caucus. It's all about students just heading up to the podium and speaking their policy position on the clause as written. After that moderated caucus, we go into an unmoderated caucus. Unmoderated caucuses, as mentioned before, are small group work. In a virtual setting, that will be accomplished through breakout rooms. You can do this in person very easily, just set up different tables where students can all congregate together to speak as we call them regional blocks because we like to put our countries that are in the same region together. So we'll have an Africa block, we'll have a Middle East block, we'll have an Americas block. Feel free to make your blocks however you'd like for your programs. But the unmoderated caucus is a 25-minute session where students read over the clause as written and offer an amendment to it. So as a group, as a regional block or as a block, they will work together to create one amendment for the clause as written. There's a couple of different ways to do that. We have an amendment form. Essentially, it's just basically a slip of paper though that has the original clause written on it so that students can look at what they're trying to amend, and then a blank space for them to write their own amendment onto. So that is really the bulk of the unmoderated caucus. I'm going to pause here. Casey or Kristen, do you have any other things to jump into here about the unmoderated caucus?
No, I think you're going along just fine, Eric.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So that's great. So 25 minutes for every group to create one amendment for the clause. After the unmoderated caucus is over, every group gets an opportunity to present their amendment. The order is up to you. We generally just go around in a circle so that each group gets to present their amendment. But every group that wrote an amendment is able to present their amendment to the full room. Again, this is led by the co-chair, who again orchestrates, MCs, who gets to talk, in what order they get to speak, and so on. And in this case, speak means present their amendment to the entire group. Following the presentation of the amendments, students will be able to vote on the amendment that they think is most in line with their country's goals. So again, students should be considering this from the state of their own country. They should not be thinking of this as an American or as whatever identity they have. They should really be internalizing the identity of their country and think whether their country would vote on a proposal. It's hard to do for middle school students. That's kind of one of the hardest leaps, mental, logical leaps that they have to make. But a country like, if they were assigned to a country like the UK or Germany, a relatively wealthy and developed country, they might not be as interested theoretically as contributing a large portion of their GDP to supporting low-income countries, right? That might not be something that a country would do in real life. We're asking students to kind of get in that mindset. That's probably the hardest logical leap for our students to make. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so there's a bunch of text in here as well, and that's going through the voting procedures. Again, we'll leave voting to you because it's a little bit dependent on your school's situation. Virtual, in person makes a big difference to the voting scheme as well. So we've just passed through voting on that amendment. That pretty much ends the all of the work on clause 1. We take a little bit of a break and then we return and do the exact same thing for clause 2. We introduce and take clarifying questions. We move into a moderated caucus, move into an unmoderated caucus. This one has a working lunch just because it's lunchtime during our program. And then there's a presentation of amendments and voting on amendments. So once you get this rough structure down, all you have to do is do it once for clause 1, repeat it for clause 2, and then repeat it if you're going to do a third clause, repeat it for clause 3. Once you get that kind of section down, that is the vast majority of the program. Moving from introducing the clause to a moderated discussion on that clause to an unmoderated caucus, which is really where they're writing their amendments. Then they present their amendments and then they vote on their amendments. That is really the bulk of the program. More text about voting and announcing breaks. Again, all of that is flexible. For our program, as mentioned, we don't get to debate and discuss clause 3 due to time constraints. All we do is present clause 3. So the authors of clause 3 still get to read theirs. Other students get to ask them clarifying questions, but there's no amendment process. Because of time constraints, all we do is vote on clause 3 as written. Again, that's unique to our program because of time constraints. If you have more time, you're more than welcome to go through that whole moderated, unmoderated amendment writing process for clause 3 if that works for you and your schedule. Finally, right towards the end of the program, we assemble the resolution with the amendments that have passed. So clause 1 was written originally in a certain way. It might have been amended in that amendment writing section, and ultimately the amendment might have been voted on and passed. Well, that's great. That amendment then takes the place of clause 1, the initial clause 1. It is still clause 1, but it's a new sentence because it's been amended, right? Same thing happens with clause 2. That ultimately gets amended. Clause 3 might even get amended as well. That leaves us with a final resolution with all 3 clauses having been read, debated, and amended. It's time for the students to read the entire resolution as written and then vote on, and then debate on whether they agree with the entire resolution as written. So we did clause 1, we did clause 2, we did clause 3. Now we're looking at the entirety of the resolution. We have another speakers list for students to speak for or against the final resolution. And then ultimately, after students get to register their approval or disapproval of the resolution as written, we get to vote on the final amended resolution as well. So we get to read through the entire resolution, and then we vote on it to make sure that as a committee, the entire group supports it, or at least the majority of the group supports the final amended resolution as well. And then we dismiss and go into closing remarks. Again, you can find all of that information and the details of each section in the co-chair guidelines and script. I'm going to quickly flip over to the presentation that we've put together, the PowerPoint that we've put together. It's a blank template which you can use to help structure your your final conference. It includes a template for your co-chair bios. We bring in outside co-chairs from universities, including Rutgers University, Camden, St. Joe's, and Temple, to be our co-chairs. There are slides that list basic protocol. Again, this is written in the virtual format, so you might need to change some of these if you're doing it in person. And just a reminder of parliamentary procedure, just so that we can touch on that right at the top. Part of that is part of our opening remarks that I kind of quickly went over, but you are more than welcome to include a refresher on parliamentary procedure and basic protocol before we begin. We do a roll call of nations. That's just so that we have an understanding of all the countries that are with us that day, so that we can mark countries that might be absent off. There is, always absenteeism in these types of programs. That's more for us. You guys know your students well. You know who's in the room with you. You know who's there and who's not there. So the roll call of nations is not quite as important for you because you would know who's in that room with you. We're not as familiar with the students as you guys are. This is the setting the committee agenda slide. Again, this is the slide the part of the program where we ask students to order the clauses that they find most interesting. You would insert a photo or text of the resolution on this page so that your students can read it while they try and figure out which clause that they want to debate first. And then we go into that kind of the bulk of the program, which is looking at individual clauses. So we introduce clause 1, then we have a speakers list for clarifying questions for operative clause 1. You can insert the start time and end time here as well. This is all fillable for you guys. So if you want to start at 10:10 and end at 10:20, you can feel free to include that. And with the speakers list, all of this is editable as well. Ethiopia speaks first, Sudan speaks second, and Brazil speaks third. So again, editable for your needs. After the clarifying questions, there's the moderated caucus. Again, a speakers list for the moderated caucus before we go into the unmoderated caucus. This is just a slide where we say that the unmoderated caucus is a great time for students to work on their amendments for the resolution and small group work. We encourage you to use breakout rooms to place students in small group conversations. Again, if you're in person, not as viable to use breakout rooms. You could just separate students around whatever space you have with you. We collect and present amendments, and then ultimately vote on the amendments as well. So one thing to note is that when students present amendments, we often ask for them to have a spokesperson, so somebody who reads the amendments. As co-chairs, if you're serving as co-chairs, you might be at this point frantically typing to keep up with your students because they'll be reading their amendment, and you'll be trying to keep up with them by typing it out. Alternatively, if you use and you're strong with technology, you can use Google Docs or other types of collaborative learning systems where you can copy and paste their amendments directly into this PowerPoint. So what we do is we use Google Docs so that we have access to all of the students' work, and we can copy and paste student amendments directly into this PowerPoint slide so that so that students, while it's being projected, can read the amendments kind of one by one on screen. Finally, there is a voting on amendments slide where, again, you could project all the amendments, whether you have 3 groups who've written amendments or 7 groups that have written amendments. This is a good slide to project all of those amendments, and then you go through one by one with students voting on those amendments. And then the bulk of this PowerPoint is just a repeat, just like the script is, of the exact same kind of script and agenda for operative clause number 2. And so you can go through and see that there's clarifying questions, a moderated caucus, unmoderated caucus, collecting and presenting the amendments when students read their amendments, and then ultimately voting on them as well. Our third clause, again, for our program, we incorporated for clause 3 the same full set. So clarifying questions, moderated caucus, unmoderated caucus, collecting and presenting amendments, and then ultimately voting on amendments. So again, you're essentially doing the same thing for clauses 1, 2, and 3. This slide here is where you would insert a photo or text of the final amended resolution to be voted on. So after all the amendments have been voted on, you incorporate those into the final resolution, and you can read through the final resolution and have students, these are just out of order. You have students who can do who can speak for or against the final amended resolution before ultimately voting on the final resolution. This is operative clause number 4. That should say final amended resolution. And that is pretty much the program. So you have a co-chair script, again, to use in stride with your draft presentation as well. Those two can be used to essentially run your junior model UN final conference. It'll take a little bit of reading through this co-chair script to get a sense of how it works. It is a little bit difficult. It is for experienced Model UN co-chairs who have done this before. So it might be a little bit tricky to go through. If you are having trouble parsing pieces of this, please reach out to us. I would be happy to schedule a separate call to work through these things piece by piece. It's really, the structure of the program is a little bit clunky and tough at times for inexperienced co-chairs, inexperienced students. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. Kristen, Casey, and I have done this enough where this is like, reading, a bedtime story to us. We can do it from memory. But the first couple of times you do it, it can be a little bit tricky. So again, encourage you guys to reach out to us if you have any questions about the script, the PowerPoint, and how to incorporate those into a really strong final conference. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Casey, Kristen, do you guys have anything else that you would like to add to that?
I know Joyce had mentioned she might be doing this or chairing her conference by herself. I just wanted you to give her some insight on that piece, knowing that we structure it as like a dual role. Yeah, so again, if you're going to do it solo, you're going to have to split your brain in 2 different ways. You're going to have to interact directly with students, ensuring that they are paying attention, obviously, but also, interacting with each other and interacting with the co-chair yourself in the correct way, following the speakers list, making sure that they know exactly what's going on at every moment can be tough, especially early in the program. The first clause, by the time you get to the second clause, they usually have a little bit better of a handle on it. You'll also have to think about the tech side of things, projecting amended resolutions to your students, having the correct slide up at the correct time, moving through the PowerPoint in sync with the program. It can be tough. So what I would suggest is giving yourself just a little bit more time as well in this program, splitting it over multiple days. You don't have to do this entire program in one day. We do it in one day just because logistically that's the only way to bring in multiple schools at the same time. But if you have the opportunity to, you could split this over 3 days, over a week, over 2 weeks, over 3 weeks. You could do one clause in 2 hours, really getting into debating and amending, giving students the time to amend the resolution in depth, to work in small groups, to really think about their clarifying questions. We do it in one day because that's the only way we can do it.
But with self-facilitation, you can really stretch it out over multiple days, which also eases the burden on yourself a little bit.
I'm thinking that I need to recruit help. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is see if I can recruit some help, at least for those technical kind of pieces. I mean, the learning curve is a little steep, but you've done such an exceptional job of laying everything out that I will rise to the occasion and muddle through it. All of my students are new to it as well, so they're not going to know the difference.
Exactly. You can do it, Joyce. You can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it. You know, our script that we've created is the culmination of many years of doing this program. And so it really is the best and exactly what you're going to need for the program. I would say start with a blank document and actually copy paste what you think you're going to need. You're not going to need probably all of those details, right? But I think that will help you digest the script and be able to do it and only use the text that you're going to need, you know?
Right.
But you'll be able to do it just fine, really.
I'm learning so much. It's fantastic. It's valuable for my students to see me taking on something new as well and working through the struggles of it. So I'm so grateful. So grateful.
Sure. And it's designed as a learning opportunity. There's times when we run our final conference and the co-chairs take off their co-chair hat and they put on their normal face and they say, this is parliamentary procedure. Let's remember we can do this, or, let's engage a little bit in this way. So it's all about fun and being engaging. And at the end of the day, they're simulating something, right? And they should be able to kind of role play and step into that role and have fun with it, right?
I am feeling a little like I've shortchanged my students with not being able to engage in discourse with students from other schools. The previous conference, my students were they participated quite a bit in that and really enjoyed that. So next year, I will make sure. Yeah. So thank you.
One other note is that we do have our final conferences starting on May 12th. They're spread out over 7 program days in May. If anybody, Joyce or anybody else that's watching this video, if you would like to get a sense of what a final conference looks like, you're more than welcome to observe our final conference and see our co-chairs in action. It's a day-long program, so it does run from 9 to 1 or so. So it's going to be tough to get that time out of your schedule. But if you could just tune in for some of those timestamps that we're going to follow, that first clause amendment process, you're more than welcome to log on. Just let us know by email. We'll send you the access link, and you can get just a sense of what it looks like.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, of course. And again, once you do it once, the second and the third time get a little bit easier every time. Kristen's been doing this for a bunch of years. I've been doing it for a couple of years. The first time you do it, it's a little bit tough, and then it gets a little bit easier every time you do it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. We are almost out of time. Kristen, do you want to just plug our middle school program real quick? I can screen. I have it pulled up. Oh, you got it pulled up already.
Yeah, I'll just pull up the slide real quick.
Yeah.
So quick plug for our middle school summer program. Our team has wanted to do this for so many years, and we're so excited to finally be able to do it. We'd love to have your help, all of our self-facilitating teachers, in promoting the program. It is going to be on the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals in Action. And this is a week-long virtual summer program for students that are interested in global affairs. Obviously, if your students are in Model UN, they probably fit the bill. But also it can be for students that you might want to join Model UN next year to kind of begin to whet their appetite. And the week is structured with activities, some lectures from some of our experts. Also, they'll be working with one another towards learning about the Sustainable Development Goals in a really meaningful and engaging way. Students can register online. They have to register individually. So the link is on the slide here. Also, if you go to our website under middle school programs, you'll see it right there. A link to the agenda is also available if you want to see what we have planned for the week and how to register for the program as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.